This is a panel on Development 101. For those of you who are interested in learning more about development or getting into development, I have two of the state's top developers sitting on stage with us. And you guys want to take a minute to introduce yourselves?
Sure. Me? Hi, everyone. Ooh. Hi, everyone. That's better. I'm Marieke Thormann. I am the Vice President of Development for Fathom Companies. We're based here in Portland, Maine. We focus mostly on hospitality, real estate development, and management, but we also do work in mixed-use development and provide consulting services to other clients here in Maine as well. Some notable projects that you may know of: Fathom developed the Press Hotel, the Canopy Hotel on Commercial Street, also our office, 80 Exchange Street. We focus on historic adaptive reuse projects often, as well as other unique financing structures to make our developments feasible. And I'll talk more about that on the panel.
I'm David Packard. I'm with PK Realty Management. We're a family-owned company. We own and manage several properties in the greater Portland area. And we mostly do light industrial and a little bit of redevelopment, and also we're working on the Yard South project, which is a 30-acre redevelopment, mixed-use redevelopment in South Portland.
Thank you, guys. And also, I'm Josh Soley, President of Maine Realty Advisors based in Portland. And can I get access to our slides from the guys in the back? Ah. All right, there we go. Welcome to Development 101. We've already done our introduction here. This is our agenda of what we'll be talking about today. If anybody at any point has questions, please approach the microphone in the middle. Don't be shy. We like to think of this as sort of a fireside chat. We'll talk, and then if you guys have any questions, don't be shy to come up and interrupt us. Between the three of us in development, each one of us comes from sort of a different background. Maine Realty Advisors, we're the largest full-service commercial real estate firm in the state of Maine. We focus on really brokerage in this area and asset management. The piece of the development that I'm sort of coming from with expertise is the development of the capital stack and the components that you put together: raising equity, binding senior debt, negotiating preferred equity and mezz debt, all of the pieces that you need to buy real estate. You know, people think, oh, this guy bought this building for $10 million. That doesn't always mean he has $10 million of cash in the account. You know, it comes of this component here. Oh, sorry, wrong button. Comes of this component here. We call this the capital stack. And as you can see, it's weighted risk to return, senior debt, which is going to be typically institutional debt that everybody sort of outlays first in their project. You're going to be going to your Bangor Savings Banks, your Maine Community Banks, your Androscoggin Banks, larger banks, JP Morgan, Wells Fargo, your typical institutional banks. A lot of you guys in this room own real estate. You probably thought, I got $100,000 here. The bank will give me $500,000. I can buy something for $600,000. And nobody really thinks past that. And as you get more and more into development, you start to develop some of the bigger projects like these guys, you start to think, you know, how do I make this $20 million project work? Do I need to come up with $1 million? Do I need to come up with $10 million? What is the right balancing act in developing my capital stack? And so for those of you, a lot of you guys already know this, but this is Development 101, so I'm going to break it down right here. I've explained senior debt. Your mezzanine debt is typically used as bridge debt. It's in and out. It's, I want to develop this vacant building. I want to lease this vacant building. I want to build this building. It's going to take me 24 months. I don't need a 10-year fixed loan with JP Morgan. I just need, 24 months. I need to get in there. I need to talk to the town, the municipality. I need to permit this. I need to negotiate my TIF. The second I get the construction finished, I'll pay these guys off. The preferred equity, they're riding co-pilot with you as the developer in the deal. These are the guys who say, you know what, we don't get out of bed for debt. We're not interested in these. Right today, this is probably going to cost you 6, 7, 8%. This is probably going to cost you 8 to 13%. Up here, these guys are going to want something more like 15 to 20%, and that's the cost based on interest rates today of what partners are. So if you call me up and you say, hey, Josh, I need $20 million, I want to do this project, I'm probably going to hammer you with some pretty high returns. And then there's a piece yourself where you need to show some skin in the game, we call it. It has to be significant enough to you personally and significant enough to the development, and that's the common equity. For those of you who bought a house, this is probably your down payment, but when it comes to commercial properties, these other players here are going to understand that as the deal gets bigger and the deal is juicier, with better returns, there's more room to pay other people to sort of enter the deal with you. This is a property, do we have a picture? This is a property I acquired about a year ago, $15 million shopping center in Rockland, Maine. Not here for any special reason. You know, I love shopping centers personally, but I understand, you know, they're not the most exciting things in the world. The important part of this process is the how it came together, right? It's Josh Soley saying, hey, this is what I have, this is what I'm willing to put down. It's Josh Soley going to his clients and saying, this is the vision I have, this is the project I've been dreaming of, this is going to be the nicest shopping center in all of Mid-Coast Maine. Having them believe me, buy into the project, understand the value we want to add. We're going to buy this, we're going to add high quality asset management, we're going to bring in the top property managers in Central Maine and Mid-Coast, and my brokerage firm is going to fill this place and we're going to keep it occupied. And people look at our pro formas, they look at our underwriting, they say, wow, this is a really, really fantastic project. We believe that you can execute on this. Where do we sign? Where do we transfer money? And once I've bound some money of my own and some money from clients, I can go to the bank and say, you know, are you in, and what are you prepared to offer us? Because for deals like shopping centers or industrial buildings where you can have stabilized cash flow relatively immediately, it's what banks crave these days. Marieka's asking me to go back one.
I just wanted to add one thing, is that this is the typical capital stack that you'll see, but one of the things I mentioned before, which is becoming more and more common, especially in this market, is there are other alternatives to achieving your capital stack, such as historic tax credits, such as new market tax credits or C-PACE loans. So there are all these alternative financing structures that sort of build in between these that can layer it, that ultimately allow you to put in less equity and need less debt because they sort of bridge that. So that's another component of development that is sort of probably not development 101, but important to note, especially in this current development market, is that it's much more challenging to have a development work with this very typical stack, depending on where you are, what your construction costs are, what your soft costs are, and what your land basis is. And oftentimes the strategies that actually get those deals to pencil and get the pro forma to work and get your investors that 15 to 20% return is those alternative financing methods that would be layered into this triangle that you see.
Are there banks that are doing C-PACE loans that we know about?
C-PACE is actually here today. Go ahead.
I was going to reiterate the question because this is being recorded. So if you guys can use the microphone, if not, I'll repeat it. The question is, are C-PACE loans approved in Maine? Are there banks that are doing it now?
Excuse me. I know that Portland, Westbrook, and I'm forgetting the third, Cumberland is approved for C-PACE now. I don't know specifically the banks. I do know that they're here today. So if anyone else knows the answer to which banks are doing them, but I believe that there was a C-PACE project approved this year in Maine, the first one. Augusta's also one. Someone just chimed in.
So moving on, you know, I explained my background is sort of in the building of the capital stack. Feasibility entitlements equally, if not more important to the development process.
So this is that fun part where you find out if you can actually do the uses in your building, in your location that you want to do. And it starts generally with, you know, at the highest level, your city's comprehensive plan. Hopefully they have one. If they don't, it's even more fun. So a lot of zoning in Maine is old and has not been comprehensively redone for decades. And so you can end up looking at what a zone says. So this, we'll use 31 Diamond Street as our first example. This is down in East Bayside. It's the ILB zone in Portland. And so that zone is meant for industrial and light industrial work. It's meant to be kind of a buffer zone next to near residential places, but still focused on that industry. And we have, we're lucky enough that it has the component of the tasting room and the accessory use exception. So 25% of your space, if your industrial use is the primary use, your accessory use can take up 25% of that square footage. And so that allows places like Orange Bike Brewery, our new gluten-free brewery in this building, to have their tasting room. And what that means is they can serve products that they make on site. And so that little wrinkle makes it very difficult for places to come in and just sell whatever they want. You can't just set up a retail space and do that. You have to actually be involved in the production of the product that you're selling. So we have Bite Into Maine has a commercial kitchen there. So they have a small takeout and retail accessory use, but that's also the main base for their food trucks and where they prep all their food that goes out on the trucks. We also have our largest tenant is Toad & Co., which is a retailer, and so they have a small retail space in the front, and then most of the warehouse space actually, where they're doing pick and pack for national distribution and their returns and secondhand incoming products. And so, or you want to go back just real quick? Yeah, so the IL zone, zoning creates the framework for what you can do. And at first blush, it can seem like it doesn't want you to do what you want to be able to do. But it's very complex, and in a lot of Maine cities and towns, it's a little bit of a rabbit's warren. You get into it, and your light industrial zone, the purpose is no residential, but then it says you can do any use that's in this other zone. And in that zone, they allow residential on the first floor over commercial uses. And you can continue to kind of go down this code path in certain instances where just because it doesn't look like your use is allowed at first blush, you can very much get there in the end. And we really like the light industrial zone because it creates this niche for products like this. Because this is on Peninsula, where if it had been upzoned, it would be something else. It would be full retail, it would be residential, because the price per square footage is just better for those products. But this zoning allows us to have uses that we love and are dear to our communities, and keep them in place. And that's part of the comprehensive plan and the long-term planning that we need to really pay attention to in our cities.
So, David, could you elaborate a little bit more on the municipal entitlement process? How long does that take? What are the components of that other developers in this room can expect to go through? How important is it to meet with the locals, the neighbors, the small committees, setting the stage for a larger development like you're doing in other locations?
It's really important to make friends with city staff and code enforcement and everybody that's going to be involved with touching your project. There's many different scopes of projects, so you can go from a rezoning or a contract zone down to just you're submitting your site plan or you're getting your building permit. And each of those different scales of development is going to have differing levels of complexity and city staff that you're going to have to interact with. And there's a lot of really confusing things, but most places you can go in and talk to staff and ask them questions, and they'll love that you're there and asking questions and not trying to just push through things. And they really appreciate having a conversation with the people that are doing the work.
Okay, so it's my turn. So my background is in construction, and so I came into development from really only seeing the construction side of it. So I worked for a general contractor and then a CM for almost a decade before coming into the development world. And my lens at that point was very much Like, okay, this is what it costs to build. They have to pay some people to design it, but as long as they can rent it or lease it or sell it for more than like my construction costs plus a few other fees, like the deal's a go. Which may or may not be your perspective, but that's sort of where we were. So there's land, soft cost, hard cost. That was my lens for a very long time. And then as I came into it, and this is just this is an example of a budget that I share that we use mostly in the hospitality. Depending on the use, these categories will change, whether you're industrial, retail, hotel, residential, office, government, hospital, sort of all of these categories will shift, but these are sort of the bigger sections. And you'll see that sort of the hard cost, that construction budget, is one line, one section of sort of the entire cost of the project. And then there are all of these other components that feed into it. One of them being feasibility permits fees that David just mentioned, and really understanding. So not only do you need to look at your land parcel or your building, understand what's my allowable use, what's the density, what's the height limit, what are my setbacks, where are my utilities, all of those things. You also need to understand, how much does my building permit cost? You need to understand, are there impact fees for sewer, for water? Who's gonna pay for my gas connections? Because the CM, in my world, I never knew about any of those costs. Now I do. Or are there municipal regulations, like we're sitting in the city of Portland, there are a lot of them in the city of Portland. Inclusionary zoning requirements, are there other, like tree funds, there are those here. So there are all these things that sort of layer into that first section. Design consultants, oftentimes the product that you're developing is highly dependent upon the quality of the design that you choose to pay for. And so this design consultant line varies drastically depending on what you're trying to do. Most of our work at Fathom is in the boutique hospitality realm, and this line item is very heavy. If you're doing an industrial development, it may be lighter. So you sort of have to choose, how much are you willing to spend that will ultimately impact the product that you're creating, and therefore the returns that you'll get. FF&E and owner direct expenses, you know, again, from the construction lens, these are all the things that go in after the C of O is achieved. All of your furniture, all of your toilet paper, all of your towels, like if you're sitting in this room, sometimes the light fixtures, all these chairs, this stage, that mic, there's all of these things that aren't included in your hard cost budget that have to be paid for to allow for the operation of the development that you're doing to actually make money. Financing fees and interest reserves, this somewhat depends on what Josh was talking about, understanding what are those fees you have to pay to achieve the financing, how much do you have to pay your lawyers, that's sort of the next line, to get all of your debt, to acquire the piece of land, interest reserve. This is something that's often misunderstood for people who've never developed, is you have to pay interest on your principal while you're building before you can actually start making money. And that can be a really significant line item. If you're building for 5 years, you have to carry the interest of that loan for that entire time. And that has to be layered into your development budget, because you're not actually making money until your project is done. And then obviously a contingency, and then hard construction cost is another one. And if you want to go one more, I just took the detail of feasibility permits and fees just to sort of further send home the message of just really understanding the complexity of all of the costs that go into a development, and sort of your overall spend needs to be less than the returns that you end up making from the development or from that use. And this is just an example of one of our sections and all of the components that layer into that. And depending on what you're building, these will vary. But the budget that is created to build a project is really comprehensive and touches everything that Josh and David talked about. Also the construction component, which is the hard cost, which is a big focus as well. But there's a very big picture of information that you need to understand to be able to know if your project is feasible or not. And I think one of the biggest challenges is learning what you don't know as a developer, and learning that there are things that you may not be able to anticipate, and coming to things like this and talking to other people about what did you experience, what did you have to pay for, are there fees that I don't know about, and really sort of stepping out and knowing that there's always going to be costs that you can't anticipate, but can you build your model to be as accurate as possible with the limited information you have? And I think the other thing I'll just share too, before we move into sort of a closing question and discussion, is that, I lost my train of thought. Maybe not. You can go to the next one. This is really just a slide that I can talk about based on questions, but this is a project that, if you're in Portland, you may have seen it in the paper. We permitted and we own Lot 1, the hotel there. This is the 385 Congress Street site, which is right next to City Hall. And this project I just highlight because it demonstrates the complexities that can be involved in a development in terms of, usually when you're buying a piece of land, it's not in the middle of the nowhere and there's no constraints. It's not, at least urban development is not like that. And when we built the budget for this hotel and when we permitted it and got entitlements, there was a lot of complexity with the adjacent owners. And I have this image more for answering questions later, so I don't need to talk about it too much now, but it just demonstrates the intricacies of our property with the other in order to get a master plan and sort of how we achieved that and what we knew to build the budget. Oh, I remembered my comment. What I was going to say before, sorry to sidetrack, is just that if you go back one, Josh, this budget that I showed, this is one category, there's probably 10 of these. When you build this, you don't have any information. So when you're looking at a site and you're building a budget, you maybe know what they're asking you to buy the land or the building for. You don't know anything. Like, you could calculate the potential building permit costs based on the potential square footage of your building, but a huge part of it is developing a detailed budget that's based on your understanding of the site and your comfort level with what you can get each line item for. Because typically you're not going to spend the money on anything, on any design consultants, on any of this until you actually own the property. And it's getting to that point where you can take it down that's a challenge. And I think that's a big hurdle in terms of transitioning into development. If you're looking to do that, is really understanding and learning how to build a full development budget that actually includes your real costs. So.
So at this point, we'll probably continue to talk, but again, I encourage anybody to come up to the microphone, ask any questions. If there's any of you out there that have ever considered being a developer or have friends that are developers and you're too shy to ask them questions, come up. I'm gonna, continue forward regardless of people's questions, and sort of act as a moderator here to stimulate some more thoughtful conversation. In your guys' opinions, what are some go or no-go questions that you want to answer early on in the process, especially before you start spending soft costs on or due diligence costs in the project? What are some of the deals where you've gone through the process and said, oh, this deal's dead, we can't work with it?
I guess I'll go first. First step for us is almost always, it's just, does it pencil? Can you get a rough estimate, and using what you think you want to do with the building? I think, it really depends what you're coming in there to do. If we're looking at just taking over a stabilized building, you have numbers, you have maintenance, you have a lot of stuff that you can get just right off the bat. If you're looking into doing a development, you've got to build out that budget and make sure that, you have the time, the money, and the patience to get through it. But then, for us early on, it's use and financials. Does it fit this kind of stuff that we like to do? And then does it make sense financially?
So you pretty early in the process begin to underwrite the model. You come up with the concept, you say, this is what we think we can do with this property, whether it's an adaptive reuse or ground up development. You have some theory about what's going to happen to it in the future.
Yeah, and I'll say this as we mostly do light industrial. So when we look at a property, it's more often than not going to be a light industrial property. So it's either going to be, a stabilized building that you're looking to just continue, or a value add, you know, kind of a redevelopment, not a full redevelopment, but can you bring in and add value to this project? And is that gonna, are the timelines gonna work out for us?
So for light industrial property, something that you specialize in, you see a vacant industrial building, you say, I like the area, I like the profile of this building, I think there's upside. What do you do next? Are you talking to local brokers, appraisers? Are you doing some sort of market underwriting to understand where your projecting rents can be?
Yeah, we're talking with our brokers, and we're looking at what we're getting for rents in our own buildings, if they're comparable, and we're asking for comps in the area. And, you know, really trying to be honest with the building and with ourselves. Is this, you know, just because they're getting, you know, $16 a square foot down the road, is your building in the same shape? Does it have the same amenities? Is it really comparable to that?
Marieke?
I think there's a couple different go, no-go scenarios, but I think one of the biggest ones is financing. And I say that sort of as a very large bucket. But for example, if you're looking at an adaptive reuse, is the project eligible for historic tax credits or not? If you don't know that answer when you're looking at it, if the answer is no, that's a no-go, because usually it doesn't pencil without them. I think zoning and feasibility is another component, and that sort of moves you closer into like the test fit density conversation, and what does your actually underwriting look like? So if you're looking at a site, and if you want to go to that, my last slide there, I can use this as an example. So when we negotiated this deal, our agreement with the seller was that we needed to be able to fit. I know. Oh, you have your pointer. That's probably easier. We needed to. Oh, I don't know what I did. Sorry. The small green button. There's 2 green buttons, to be clear. So I'm not colorblind. So this site, our original offer to the seller who owns this whole thing was that in our due diligence phase, we needed to be able to confirm that we could fit a hotel that had at least 150 keys in it. That was sort of our checkbox, and that was based on our underwriting. And I say that because there's dimensionality to this lot that we needed to work with an architect to figure out, can we fit sort of a double loaded corridor, so hotel rooms here and here, in this parcel while still getting the valet access here, still having parking garage access here, and fit this here. That was like a gut check exercise that we had to do. And I say that as an example because density and sort of what you can actually physically lay out and fit on a piece of land is critical to understanding if your underwriting will be successful. And so that's sort of the other step of it. And there's like physically test fitting with an architect or yourself to make sure that you can fit what you want. And there's also just researching the zoning and researching the density. What's my height limit? What are the setbacks? How many units can I fit? I mean, on this parcel, for example, when we get over 125 feet, our floor plate can't exceed 10,500 square feet. So we can go up 150 feet, but our restriction at that level. So understanding nuances to the code in that very early step, similar to what David said with sort of nuances to get what you want, you need to understand the nuances that prevent you from getting what you want as well. So I think that sort of understanding site feasibility, zoning is a part of it, and then the financing, and whether it's historic tax credits or whether it's your underwriting achieving a debt coverage service ratio that a bank will give you debt. It can make money, it can give you a return, but if you're not getting the cash that you need, you're never going to get a loan to be able to finance it. Unless you have all cash to make up that whole triangle that Josh showed, your deal will never happen.
Yeah, I want to reiterate what Marieke said. You know, again, each of us sort of have different areas within development that we specialize in, and with mine being, you know, kind of managing the capital stack. We ran into this issue the other day. Some of you might know, I'm working with the developers for the Time and Temperature building in Portland. We're planning right now, you know, close to 200 units, mixed use, about 50% micro unit housing, 50% short-term rentals. And you know, the numbers look great. We like the building. We like the location. It got through every single no-go. The issue was, at the end of the day, we realized, holy crap, we're spending $120 million. Where are we going to find a bank that'll even have the capacity to give us the debt we need? You know, most of these local banks in Maine that I think we have probably 20, 30 bankers in the audience here, legal lending limit per borrower, 20, 30, 40 million at the most. If you need $80 million of senior debt, where do we begin? You know, do I need to start daisy chaining local banks together, find a primary sponsor bank? Do I need to create a debt fund just to make the project work? Do I have to call bankers that I've never met before from Boston or New York? And you know, it's not necessarily a component you start thinking about, because when we were underwriting the model and working on our pro forma, we care about the return, right? Can my preferred equity make the money it needs? Can my mezz debt make the money it needs? Can the senior debt make the money it needs? Is it hitting the right debt service coverage ratio that these guys are all going to require? And then you realize, oh, there's one too many zero here. And so it starts to become a little bit more complicated.
Add one more thing to that is, when you're doing that whole analysis and you're looking at, okay, we need this much debt and this much equity, you may be asking, well, why don't you just put in more equity? Doing that reduces your return. So the idea is you want to balance your debt and your equity so that you're optimizing the return for those preferred investors or the common equity. And if you're like, okay, well, then maybe I'll just, you know, for time and temp, for example, why wouldn't they, you know, let's reduce our debt so that it's more appealing to a local bank. That's not really feasible, because then your returns start going down. And so that's an important thing to understand as well.
And what's your thinking behind the mixed-use development? You're trying to find a way.
So I assume you're asking about our hotel specifically. So we don't own Lot 2.
Oh, the condos are not yours.
No, but I will add that in this Lot 1 development, we do have 9 condos on the top floor, and those are being used to buy down the cost basis of the hotel. And if we did not have those 9 condos, this deal would not work.
So
Why 9?
I bet 50% of the room at least can know why we're only building 9. And it's not because the seller put a deed restriction for 10, which we do have, but we're still only building 9.
So for those of you who are not from Portland, there's municipal restrictions that prevent developers who want to build housing from building massive housing scale. So, but I also want to clarify David's question a second ago. You know, there's one developer who purchased this whole lot. Marieke's development team is developing this hotel here. These are planned by the partner.
We own Lot 1. It was subdivided, so it's now technically 2 separate parcels.
I saw a question in the audience. Just come right up to the mic. Looks like Nick.
Well, you kind of half answered it, but what was the process of splitting off the lot? Is that something you knew you wanted to do right away, or kind of how'd that go?
The process is challenging. We did a similar thing for the canopy, which we split off a corner of the parcel for the rest of it. Oftentimes in this type of scenario, a developer is looking to diversify the product that they're putting on the parcel. And in this case, Rieger Dasco develops condos, and a hotel doesn't compete with that. So sort of there's like office, hotel use. So they were seeking a developer to come in and buy a parcel to essentially add value to the rest of the master plan. So that's where we came in, and why we chose to develop the hotel is because that's what we do, and that was something that was allowable by the seller. They weren't going to sell to someone who'd put a competing product there. And it was very challenging. The amount of easements and licenses that we have with them, I don't want to tell you the amount of legal time we spent on those, but it's because of complications like, let me show you this. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with this site, but right now there's sort of an existing building here that's an old printing press. There's sort of an old car shop here. This is a parking lot. One of the city requests was that this sort of path remain open for through block penetration, to allow for pedestrians to sort of walk through the site and not create a full street wall. So this is an example of a city asking for something, and then us having to work with them to get our entitlements and meet their expectations and needs. It also allowed for sort of a division between these two buildings, which is great for daylight. But I'll say that what that did, this requirement, prevented us from being able to just do a solid parking garage like we planned and then build sort of to our extent. So we now have 2 layers of parking, but they're at grade. And this path here is a raised deck on the 2nd level to allow that for that pedestrian walkthrough, which we're building to sort of support the city's request. But doing that means that we had to coordinate with the seller on the exact elevation of this deck, what it looks like, what the design is, knowing that we're probably not building these at the same time. And so we have easements that outline, our deck has to be with an elevation X and Y, and your deck has to be at elevation Z and D so that we meet, because they could be built 10 years apart. So that's just one example of the complexities. And like our storm drain system, it has an easement to drain out here. We're now doing the calculations for our storm, and that doesn't work because of the gravity, and now we have to go here. Like, the complications are endless, but if you want to be developing in an urban setting, these are the sites that are available, and you're not going to be able to do that without this type of complexity, and so you just need to account for it, account for the time, the money, and usually you can be successful, assuming your model is strong enough to withstand it.
We have a question from a most esteemed architect in the audience.
So, Josh, my question is about in the capital stack, the kind of mysterious preferred equity. Like we all know that can be like rich family and acquaintances, but like maybe some categories on how you find that preferred equity and the different, I know there's plenty of structures, if you could talk about that a little bit.
Great question, Caleb. So Caleb's talking about this piece where it's still equity, and they're sort of writing co-pilot with you as the sponsor, general partner, or developer of the deal. I find early in your career as developers, you're going to have the most issue raising this money because you have no track record. You have no experience, no reputation. No one knows who you are. So just because you have a good deal doesn't mean money will flock to you. What you will find is as you advance, you develop a track record, you become established in that market type or product type or asset class, it actually becomes the easiest piece. And so to Caleb's question of when does that flop happen, how do I start raising preferred equity? Should I ask my cousin, he works for GM, he's got some extra cash? The answer is any way possible to start, because if you want to build a track record, you need to find a way into the industry. And at this point, in my career, I've just developed a list of individuals, from Northeast United States to Southwest Mexico. If I talk to somebody, they have interest in this asset class or product class, I ask them point blank, listen, you're interested in this, how much you want to put up? How much interest do you have? What are you willing to do? And I just add it to a database of preferred equity partners that I've developed over the years. You can pay somebody to borrow preferred equity. So at my firm, MRA, we have an entire division dedicated to negotiating this exact capital structure. We have a capital markets team that's very proficient locally at beating down our friends over here that are bankers, but also reaching out to debt funds, reaching out to equity players. I work with a company in New York called ARC, and they do a lot of the legwork for me with regards to preferred equity. If I have a deal that hits their range, it hits the right numbers, hits the stack, hits the product type, I can call them up and say, hey, I need, you name it, and their full-time job as a company is actually putting together pref equity so that I don't have to deal with them myself. Because, for example, this, and if I have any preferred equity partners out there, I apologize, but it's not you who I'm talking about. For this deal right here, I've got 17 tenants and I've got 11 partners and I've got a bank. So my job as the asset manager for the property is I need to make sure my tenants are happy. I need to make sure my preferred equity is happy. I need to make sure my bank is happy, and that's a full-time job. It's not necessarily like shaking hands and kissing babies. It's keeping everybody informed of what you're doing. I signed a 5-year lease with TJ Maxx, and 6 months later I realized I forgot to tell my lender, and he calls me up saying, send me that lease. I want to show it off to my bank. I want to tell everybody how great this deal was. And, you know, just remembering to just communicate with everybody and let everybody know what's going on. And communication with the preferred equity, with the bank, with all components of the capital stack will make them want to give you more money. So, Caleb, if you need help with that further, feel free to give me a call, or I can put you in touch with our capital markets team.
An answer, one other addition to that is just sort of figuring out how you want to approach achieving pref equity. If you're a developer that's not utilizing someone like MRA, it's also understanding, you know, if you have a $10 million project and you want to put in, I'm just using simple math, you as the common equity want to put in $1 million, and you're looking for a 70-30 loan to value, so you're going to get $7 million worth of debt. You have a gap of $2 million, for example. So thinking about, okay, I have $2 million. Do I know 10 people that want to give me $100,000? Maybe you do. Maybe you don't. Do I know one person that would give me $2 million? Maybe.
Do you know 100 people that want to give you $10,000 each?
Or that, exactly. So just thinking about sort of what that $2 million breaks down to, and I think the more important thing is, so in that case, maybe it's sort of what some people call a friend and family raise, where you just call people you know, like Josh mentioned, and you build that equity through that. If that deal shifts to $100 million, and you still only want to put in $1 million, and you need to get $20 million of equity, maybe the circle that you're reaching to becomes a larger family office that's going to be one person that comes in and gives you all that equity, or a corporate group that comes in and does the same thing. But you sort of need to think about, based on the amount of equity, what your most strategic approach to achieving that is, and what's the most realistic, especially in your timeline. You know, do you have 120 days to close and you need that then, or do you have a year? Sort of what's your timeline to actually building that equity is important too.
Caleb, did we answer your question? Step up to the mic.
In the morning section, they mentioned about some legislation that was intended to sort of stop bands of concerned citizens from kind of stopping development projects after they've gone through the capital stack building and all the zoning and permitting. My question is, how kind of present is that in the minds of developers? Is it really a concern? Is it dampening development in Maine? And my guess is there's probably certain municipalities that are kind of more known for that than others, but is that something that really does need to change for development to kind of increase in Maine?
Well, I think what you're talking about is a disease. It's far worse than COVID. It's called NIMBYism. And I don't understand how it's spread. It could be airborne. It could be via touch. The CDC has not come out and talked with how to regulate this issue. That being said, there was actually a really funny post in the New Yorker the other day, and it was a picture of this sweet old lady, and there's a 100-unit condo development going up in her backyard, and she's in the picture saying, I'd like to buy a unit, and then the second she buys a unit, she says, I'm very against this development. I don't want anybody else, I don't want anybody else coming in this building with me. And of course, the developer's thinking to themselves, hang on a second, we just sold you a unit. You don't want anybody else in the building with you. There's a component of selfism to it, and I don't think everybody sees the big picture of the benefits of development to a community, the benefits long-term to a neighborhood. It's the reason we're trying to build units is because there are people who are homeless, and it's not just us padding our bottom line. Of course, we need to make money to do anything. I don't see any of you lawyers, calling me up and saying we'd like to represent you for free. I'm happy to pay you if you're worth it. So if you get a high-quality developer, and that developer says, I want to build 100 units, I'm sorry it inconveniences you a few people. However, if you take your eye off of that piece and keep it on the ball of there's about to be 100 new people, there are going to be 100 new friends of yours in your backyard. That's called a YIMBY, and we're good friends with them.
I was just going to add another lens too, which is that when we have an option on a site or we are looking at one, we are very much tracking potential legislation that's coming in the municipality that we're in that could inhibit the development that we're planning. We have an option on a piece of land in Biddeford, for example, that we've had under option for 5 years, and we're trying desperately to build something there. And since the time the option has started, there's been an inclusionary zoning legislation that's been passed, and part of that was us just having a relationship with the city and continuing to talk to them and understanding that because our option was enacted prior to this legislation, would we be subject to this or not? Whether we choose to comply with it is our choice, but to understand that, look, the price that we negotiated, the deal that we've underwrote, was underwritten prior to this legislation, and that's really important to track. And I know in the city of Portland, there were many developers tracking the Green New Deal that was passed, and many that were able to get their projects approved prior to that legislation being passed. And if they hadn't, those deals probably wouldn't exist today. And so to answer your question, I think it's our responsibility to be aware of all of these things that are coming through that could impact deals that we're either looking at in the future, that we already have under contract, or God forbid that we're already sort of mid permitting or about to apply for a building permit and all of our soft costs are spent, and then this could totally uproot the deal.
Yeah, I just want to add, it's become a very major issue recently. There were a couple of very high-profile projects that literally just had the rug swept out from under them. You know, they already had zoning approval, and we're moving on to the next step, and then the city goes back and takes away that zoning approval. And so one of the things we've kind of touched on a little bit, but time. And developments have a really long runway and a really long tail, and that provides opposition with a lot of time to mess you up. And so, you know, it's not just paying attention to what's coming down the road in those cities, but really also the feeling in the city itself. They can be saying all the right things, but then when it comes down to the actions they're taking are not helping you build more housing, are not helping you, you know, grow the community in a good, positive way. And so it's really important to pay attention to both what they're saying, but also what they're doing. And so that legislation, really hopeful for that going forward, because it kind of crystallizes when development rights vest. And so if you've gotten past a certain point, then you have vested rights, and the city can no longer reach back and take those away.
So we have time for one more question if anybody's interested. There's about a minute or two left on the clock. I want to give everybody the opportunity before I say thank you for being a wonderful audience, and thank you to these speakers. Going once? Going twice? Okay. Thank you guys for being a wonderful audience, and thank you to these guys for speaking. If any of you want to come up and ask us questions after this, you're welcome to. We can talk about horror stories.